Hello everybody and welcome back to another Hellbound Garage and to this planned, unplanned video. Sound confusing? Let me explain. This is my 1975 Datsun 280Z that I am currently working on for the next video for the channel. But being a homeowner, there are sometimes things that take priority over doing projects like these, and that's where today's video comes in. More specifically, that's where my 2003 Toyota Tundra comes into play. If you've seen any of my other videos, then you know I built this one-off flatbed for my Toyota Tundra, and it has already seen some stuff, and it's been a real good deal. But what happens when you got to do landscaping? As you can tell, the steel on the bed already kind of indicates what is happening today. I need bedsides. Now the game plan with these bedsides is 1, they need to be removable. 2, they need to be durable. 3, they needed to be relatively inexpensive. 4, I want to be able to use the longer bedsides as ramps. Now, just like other parts of the truck, I definitely take influence from what the Australians have done with their tray builds, and I wanted a style similar to that, but at the same time, a lot of the bedsides that they use for their trays are all bent steel. They're not tube steel and flat stock. And that, unfortunately, makes that overly complicated for somebody like me who doesn't have access to those tools. So my design for this is super simple. With that being said, I'm done talking. Let's get to work on building these bedsides. We've got one of the side frames, I guess if you want to call them that, all welded up besides the little end caps here. So this is kind of what we're working with. And then we'll have the centerpiece here that holds everything in, but I'll get into that later. But I've got 2 more sides to do before I move on to the next step. So cue the time lapse and let's get this done. I've got all 3 bedsides done, and kind of run into some issues here. Things I didn't even think about, so let me go over them because it's definitely going to take some decision making on my part. So I spent, a decent amount of time thinking about how I was going to design these, even though overall it is a simple fabrication project, but I really didn't want to have to deal with any cutting. So I took some time and I wrote down everything, took measurements, and bought the materials at length. I paid the extra amount to have them cut it instead of me cutting it, just because I wanted this to go quick. Which leads me into my first issue. This gap right here. You notice there's a gap here, but at the top there's nothing. When I originally built the flatbed, everything was on sawhorses, on a flat surface and everything. And I got it on here, but the headache rack itself was made on the truck, and because of the window seal, I couldn't have it completely square with the flatbed, which then in turn makes all the measurements, anything past the base of the flatbed, slightly smaller than the actual flatbed itself. Alright, so the second thing that ran into that's an issue that I'm going to I'm going to live with is right here. You're probably not going to be able to see it, and it's probably only going to annoy me, but there's a slight height difference between these two. And, well, that's because of the diamond plate. So when the flatbed was built, I specifically raised the height of the frame that it sits on to let the diamond plate sit into the gap and kind of make it more flush. What I forgot to account for was the diamond plate pattern itself. That's even taller than the sheet itself. Didn't think anything about it. Not that big of a deal. I'm gonna live with it. While we're at this corner, let's talk about the third thing that I ran into that I am going to have to find a solution for, and that is this gap. So when I did the planning for this to make sure that I didn't have to do as much cutting as possible, I based everything off of materials that I've used in the past on projects, the materials that I used for the flatbed, and you know, for the most part, it should be good. But I also took in one more thing into account that I don't normally do, and that is weight. Because it is steel and it is heavy, and because of the way they're going to be built, they're going to be strong no matter what. I wanted to kind of shave some weight off the materials just for a few pounds. I mean, the Tundra is getting pretty heavy. And the problem with that is the sizes. They didn't have the same size material. They didn't have the 2x2 square that I normally use in the gauge that I wanted. And if they did, it was like double or triple the price, which I always think about. So I went with a 1.5 by 1.5 instead of a 2x2. And I forgot to take into account that distance in there. And the fourth and final issue that I'm having right now, that is also going to make it so I have to make some choices before I can continue, is these guys right here. So these are a gate pintle and a gate strap, and this is how I'm going to be mounting the bedsides to the truck and make them completely removable, because if you can see, they kind of they slide on they slide on each other. If you look, don't mind that overhang, I've already accounted for that. If you look on the side, you'll notice a gap, and well, that's something else I didn't take into account for. Now there's two things I can do to make up for the gap, and that is put a plate directly behind this to make up the distance, almost like a giant washer, or I can increase this gap here, move this bedside out to take up the space, and then just figure out a thicker piece of material to put in these gaps. It's just something I have to choose. And while I am deciding what I want to do on that front, I'm going to go ahead and weld in the plate steel for inside the frames. I won't video or time lapse any of that because, well, it's just laying down lines of bead, and after a while that just kind of gets boring. So after I've put the inserts in the frames, and as well as figure out the mounting solutions for everything, I will check back in with you.
1 week later.
I don't exactly remember where I left off, so let me show you one of the panels and everything that's happened, my solutions, my setbacks. It's been an ordeal. So here is one of the completed panels. Completed. Alright, so I think I left off and it was just the frame. And as you can tell, we've now welded pieces inside the frame here. But you will notice this really long bead of weld down the entire thing. And that is because somewhere lost in translation from when they didn't have the size material that I actually wanted, and ordering the smaller flat plate, I ended up not getting this section cut to the correct length, which then meant after welding it and realizing that I put one of these in here, that I had an inch gap along the top on all the pieces. And I was stuck with the choice of, do I cut apart the frames I just got done welding, or do I lay a 1-inch strip, say screw it, and just do a little extra welding? Well, I decided to do a little extra welding. and it didn't turn out bad, but it led to another problem. This is probably a really bad angle, and I've straightened it out most of the way, but welding that whole extra deal along created a big bow, and I ended up having to actually use my truck because I don't have anything heavy enough to roll on top of these panels and get them somewhat straight. But unfortunately, they kind of look a little like bacon because of all the extra weld. I thought I took time with the size of my welds, let them cool all the way down, but after having my dad help me with something else, he saw the lengths of my welds and told me that they were just a little too long and I should have had them a little further apart. You know, one of those things that unless you do this every day, you're not gonna know. So it created a setback, but we got around it. I also got the hinge portions of these brackets welded on here. Originally I was just gonna bolt these through, but because of the 1/2 inch gap from this sitting flush and having to fill it with another piece, it was easier to just plug weld them than to drill holes through this 1/2 inch thick plate plus the 1.5 inch tube. And if you remember, I had a gap because this is the back panel. I had a gap between the back panel and the side panels. Well, that 1/2 inch plate also worked well as the spacer for the gap between there. So I have this solid 1/2 inch thick steel welded on both ends to take up the gap. Then the last thing I did was use riv nuts and drilled out holes, put riv nuts in, and got these brackets mounted all the way around the bed, as well as these brackets on both sides of the bed for the latches. Normally at this point I would take a grinder, grind down all of these welds. That way you get a nice flush look and a little bit more of a professional look. But you're not going to be able to tell it because I'm not wearing my brace. But I ended up messing up my wrist, and trying to grind with just one wrist is almost impossible. So because this is a utilitarian accessory to the bed, I'm going to leave all the exposed welds. They're not bad welds, so they're not ugly. I just like that flat look. But the amount of time that this is honestly going to be on the truck instead of being stored in the garage is pretty minimal. So honestly, I could leave them bare, but I don't like the bare metal look either. So I'm gonna take my palm sander, give a light scuff to all 3 panels, and then get them painted. And after that, I'll get them put on the truck and I'll show you the final product.
Years later.
Finally, after what seems like forever, finally done with the bedsides, and I'm happy that it's done, but the follow through on some of my concepts wasn't the greatest. So let me show you what the final product is. There it is. From a distance it looks pretty good, right? That being said, I will not be using this coating again. No, this is the bed liner that you can find at Harbor Freight for like $65 a gallon. If it's between this or Herculiner, which I used on the rest of the bed, definitely going Herculiner. This took way too long to cure, and it ended up where it was sitting when I painted the other side. I don't know if you can see it, like these marks here, if that made any kind of sense whatsoever. I ended up going back through with some spray bed liner and just touching up that. I'd be way more disappointed if this was being permanently mounted to the truck, but because this is a removable piece that I can pick and choose whether or not it sees bad weather, I'm all right with what it is. Now later down the line, if it chips, peels, whatever, definitely going to be using a different product. Definitely not happy with it, but it does the job. Now, one of the concepts that I really liked in my head that kind of worked on here are these guys here. So we've got two latches that pop off over here and here, and this swings down just like a normal truck bed. Super nice. The thing I was kind of hoping is to be able to use the bed sides as the same way, and it kind of worked. If we go over here, I'll show you what I mean. We've got another latch here, and then we can flip this down, and that's where it ends up because of right in here. Let me flip this back up. So this hinge is actually slightly higher here than on the ends, and that's because of the bow that shows that gap. Now I'm actually okay with that because something I didn't think about was the fenders. If these swing down without any kind of braces, this bedside would swing down and smack the fender, and the fenders were way harder to make than the bedsides. So I'm okay with this not working 100% the way I thought. At the end of the day, the main purpose of these hinges was so that I could tilt and remove the bedsides, which it does. So this is kind of what it looks like when you unhinge everything. You know, it's a neat little feature, but at the same time, not the intended purpose. Overall, if I had to do this project again, looking at some other ideas and some other concepts, I definitely would change some things, which I still might in the future. I'd still want to keep the swing down gate, so the back part probably is never going to change. But these sides, instead of swinging, they may just, because I already have the mounting locations, I may make some kind of a bracket and have them just slide into here instead of pivoting. It's just kind of one of those afterthought things. It still does serve the purpose. It is a finished product. It will do its job. So one more time, here it is. That being said, this is going to finish this video. I do have some future plans built into the mounting locations, which honestly I spent the most time thinking about on this project, and those will come in later videos when those things become necessary. So for the time being, thank you for watching. Thank you for your support. Until the next one.